There's a quiet mass exodus happening that almost nobody is talking about. Not the loud kind, not protests, not revolutions, not dramatic exits. It's subtle, silent. The most conscious, awake, and psychologically developed people are slowly withdrawing from society. They're not angry. They're not bitter. They're just disappearing, leaving social media, stepping away from careers, ending relationships that no longer fit, choosing solitude over constant connection, choosing depth over noise. Carl Jung predicted this. He called it the necessary withdrawal. He believed that when a person becomes psychologically conscious enough, participating in the collective unconscious doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It becomes physically and psychologically painful, not metaphorically painful, somatically painful. Your body reacts, your nervous system reacts, your psyche says no. And Jung was clear about something important. This disappearance isn't a failure, it isn't antisocial behavior, and it isn't spiritual escapism. It's a survival mechanism. When consciousness develops beyond a certain point, staying immersed in mass unconsciousness becomes destructive to the psyche. Here's the core idea Jung understood. Society doesn't run on awareness. It runs on collective unconsciousness, shared delusions, agreed-upon blind spots, mass projections, collective shadows. These aren't flaws in the system, they are the system. And the system only functions as long as people participate unconsciously. The moment someone wakes up, really wakes up, not just intellectually but psychologically, they become incompatible with the collective container. They can see the projections everyone else is living inside. They recognize the shadows people are avoiding. They understand the unconscious games being played in conversations, institutions, politics, relationships. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Jung lived this himself. As his consciousness expanded, ordinary social interaction became increasingly unbearable. Not because he felt superior, not because he rejected people, but because he was awake in rooms full of people who were still psychologically asleep. Every conversation required him to pretend he didn't see what he saw, pretend he didn't understand what was really happening beneath the words, pretend he didn't feel the unconscious dynamics driving everything. This is the curse of consciousness. You become psychologically alone even when you're surrounded by people. You're speaking a different language. You're perceiving different layers of reality. And the effort required to constantly translate between your consciousness and the collective unconsciousness becomes exhausting. So the awakened begin to disappear. Not because they hate society, but because staying inside it requires betrayal of the self. Every day demands pretending to be asleep. Every interaction demands dimming your awareness. Every relationship asks you to be smaller than you've become. Eventually, the psyche says, enough. Withdraw. Preserve what you've developed. Stop letting the collective unconscious drain you. Jung discovered that as you integrate your personal shadow, the collective shadow becomes unbearable to witness. When you've faced your own darkness, watching society project its darkness outward becomes agonizing. You see entire groups being blamed, demonized, scapegoated. Political enemies, social enemies, cultural enemies, everyone pointing outward, refusing to look within. Jung called this the burden of seeing. The awakened person sees that most social conflict is shadow projection. Wars are collective shadows clashing. Political divisions are mass projections colliding. Outrage culture is unconscious material desperately looking for a target. Once you see this, participation becomes impossible. You can't join the mob when you see it's hunting its own shadow. You can't pick sides when you understand both sides are projecting. You can't engage in collective blame when you recognize it as collective unconsciousness playing itself out. So withdrawal happens not from superiority but from psychological necessity. One of Jung's students described it perfectly. He said he used to have strong political opinions. Then he integrated his shadow and realized those opinions were projections. Now, when he watched political debates, he didn't see truth versus lies. He saw two groups of people violently projecting their unconscious material onto each other and calling it justice. He couldn't participate anymore. It felt like joining a mass delusion. And here's something deeper that Jung noticed. The awakened don't just see the collective shadow, they feel it. As consciousness increases, sensitivity increases. Being around unconscious projection begins to feel like psychological violence. Not judgment, not arrogance, genuine energetic incompatibility. Jung experienced this firsthand. After his individuation process, being in crowds became nearly unbearable. Not because he disliked people, but because he could feel the unconscious material swirling everywhere. Repression, projection, unintegrated shadow. It created a psychological storm that most people couldn't feel, but he could. This is why awakened people leave social media first. Social media is a non-stop shadow projection machine. Every scroll is an onslaught of unconscious material. Every comment section is a battlefield of projection. For someone who's integrated their shadow, it's like being forced to watch people punch themselves while blaming others for the pain. Jung's second major insight explains even more. Once you've individuated toward your authentic self, performing the persona becomes impossible, and society demands almost nothing but persona performance. Before awakening, you could play the game unconsciously, smile when expected, say the correct things, perform your role. But once you've touched the deeper self beyond the mask, going back to persona performance feels like psychological death. Every social environment demands a mask. The workplace persona, the family role, the acceptable opinions, the approved emotions. For someone still identified with their persona, this feels normal. For someone who's found their self, it feels suffocating. Jung discovered this through his own life. After his confrontation with the unconscious, he could no longer perform the role of the respectable Swiss psychiatrist. He couldn't pretend agreement with ideas he saw through. He couldn't maintain relationships that required falseness. So he withdrew to Bollingen, his tower by the lake, where he could live without a mask. This wasn't antisocial, it was pro-authentic. The awakened person doesn't reject society out of anger. They withdraw out of incompatibility. They've become too real for environments built on performance, too whole for systems that only accept fragments. One of Jung's patients, a successful executive who had undergone individuation, described sitting in board meetings where everyone was performing their roles, saying what executives are supposed to say, thinking what executives are supposed to think. She said she couldn't do it anymore. Her authentic self had no place in that room, only her persona did. And that persona was dead. She didn't quit dramatically. She quietly transitioned out, moved to a small town, chose a simpler life where she could be real instead of impressive. Not because she failed, but because she succeeded in finding herself. And this is happening everywhere. The awakened are leaving careers that require constant performance, ending relationships built on false selves, abandoning social circles that demand masks. They aren't failing at society. They're succeeding at authenticity, and that success makes participation impossible. Here's what Jung understood at an energetic level, something most people never consider. Maintaining consciousness inside an unconscious environment requires enormous psychological energy. And awakened people are beginning to realize something uncomfortable but unavoidable. It isn't sustainable. Think about what a conscious person has to do just to function in normal society. You're constantly filtering unconscious projections. You're holding boundaries against emotional and energetic leakage. You're translating depth into surface language. You're maintaining your inner frequency while surrounded by psychological static. And on top of that, you're not only processing your own inner material, but unconsciously processing the material everyone else is leaking into the space. Jung called this psychological labor. invisible work that conscious people are forced to do just to exist in unconscious environments. Every interaction requires restraint, not reacting to projections, not absorbing other people's unconscious material, not getting pulled into collective drama, not matching the emotional frequency around you, not betraying your truth just to maintain surface harmony. For unconscious people, this isn't work. They're moving with the collective current. They don't feel the drag. But for conscious people, it's like swimming upstream in a tsunami of unconsciousness. Eventually, you either leave the water or drown. Jung noticed a disturbing pattern among his most conscious patients. They developed chronic fatigue, strange physical symptoms, depression that didn't respond to conventional treatment. Doctors couldn't find anything wrong. But Jung saw the cause clearly. These people weren't sick. They were exhausted from maintaining consciousness in environments that constantly pulled them backward. The cure wasn't medication. It wasn't more therapy. It was withdrawal. One woman Jung worked with was a teacher who had spent years doing inner work and shadow integration. She developed severe, unexplained fatigue. Medical tests showed nothing abnormal. Through analysis, Jung realized she was expending massive energy holding her consciousness while surrounded by unconscious colleagues, institutional pressure, and students projecting their material onto her all day. She wasn't ill, she was depleted. When she left teaching and moved into nature, her energy returned within weeks. Not because she rested more, but because she no longer had to fight the constant pressure of collective unconsciousness. Her psyche finally stopped defending itself. This is why so many awakened people feel an irresistible pull towards solitude, nature, and small conscious communities. Not because they're running from responsibility, but because they're protecting something fragile and precious. Consciousness is not infinite. It requires the right conditions to survive. Jung understood this deeply. He saw withdrawal not as avoidance, but as preservation. This leads to one of Jung's most important archetypal insights: the hermit phase. Every person undergoing true individuation must pass through it, not permanently, but necessarily. The hermit archetype isn't about misanthropy. It's about psychological necessity. When transformation is happening at a fundamental level, the psyche requires distance from influences that would fragment it. You need silence to hear your inner voice. You need solitude to integrate what society constantly interrupts. You need space where you're not being pulled back into old roles. Jung himself entered profound hermit phases. His years at Bollingen were not retreats or vacations. They were acts of survival. He needed distance from collective consciousness to fully develop individual consciousness. He needed separation from projections to understand his own depths. This is exactly what's happening now. Awakened people aren't disappearing because they're weak or antisocial. They're following an archetypal pattern as old as consciousness itself. Withdraw, integrate, transform. The hermit phase is where shadow integration can happen without social pressure to repress it. It's where the self emerges without persona demands. It's where inner wisdom develops without constant external noise. But Jung was very clear about one thing. The hermit phase is not escape, it's preparation. The awakened person withdraws not to abandon the world, but to develop something the world doesn't yet know how to receive. Jung described these individuals as deep-sea beings, adapted to psychological depths others can't survive. They can't develop in shallow water. One of Jung's analysans, a philosopher, disappeared from academic life for 3 years. Colleagues thought he'd collapsed, lost his mind, failed. In reality, he was integrating insights that would have been impossible while maintaining his academic persona. When he eventually returned, he didn't return to the center. He returned at the edges. And what he brought back reshaped thinking in ways that would never have emerged without withdrawal. From the outside, disappearance looks like abandonment. From the inside, it feels like deepening. The awakened aren't running away. They're going deeper than society allows. They're doing work that cannot be done while constantly performing, explaining, defending, or translating themselves. And this is where Jung's final insight changes everything. The disappeared don't stay gone forever, but when they return differently. They don't return to participate in unconsciousness. They return to offer consciousness, but only to those who are ready for it. They follow the ancient hero's pattern: withdrawal, transformation, return with gifts. But the return is never to the mainstream. It can't be. Once you individuate, you cannot de-individuate. Once you awaken, you cannot convincingly pretend sleep. Once you've lived without a mask, you can't willingly put it back on. So the awakened return to the margins, the edges, the quiet places where consciousness can exist without compromise. They become artists creating from depth rather than approval. Healers working with individuals who are ready to awaken. Teachers guiding small groups rather than addressing the masses. Writers offering maps for those who feel the same pull to disappear. They become border dwellers, present but not absorbed, available but not consumed. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. His patients who fully individuated rarely returned to their old lives. They created new ones, simpler, quieter, more authentic. They found ways to contribute without sacrificing their consciousness. One therapist Jung worked with disappeared for 2 years. When she returned, she didn't go back to general practice. She could no longer work with people who weren't ready. She worked only with individuals going through spiritual crisis. Her practice was small, almost invisible, but life-saving for those who found her. This is the model. Awakened people vanish from mass society and reappear in conscious pockets. Parallel structures, quiet alternatives, depth instead of dominance. Jung believed this wasn't collapse, it was evolution. The pioneers disappear first. They build the new terrain quietly. And when the next wave awakens, there's somewhere to land. From the outside, this looks like loss, abandonment, even betrayal. People ask the same questions over and over. Where did all the conscious people go? Why are the wisest voices going silent? Why are the ones who see the deepest walking away at the exact moment society seems to need them most? Jung would say this perception is backwards. They're not abandoning the collective. They're preparing something for it. What looks like disappearance is actually architecture. In their withdrawal, the awakened are building inner and outer structures that the collective doesn't yet have the capacity to hold. In their silence, they're gestating insights that would be distorted, attacked, or flattened if spoken too early. In their solitude, they're becoming whole enough to eventually offer something real. Jung believed consciousness evolves in waves, not all at once. The pioneers always move first, and moving first means moving alone. The awakened disappear because they've crossed a psychological threshold. They can no longer tolerate the collective shadow being endlessly projected outward. Their authentic self can no longer perform the persona society demands. The energy required to maintain consciousness in unconscious environments becomes unsustainable. So the psyche initiates withdrawal. This withdrawal is not pathology, it's archetypal. Jung identified it as a necessary stage in individuation. The hermit phase is not optional for deep psychological transformation. Without it, the self cannot fully consolidate. Without solitude, the psyche remains fragmented by external expectations. Without distance, the old patterns reassert themselves. In solitude, something crucial happens. The inner voice grows clearer. The self strengthens. Values reorganize. The person stops living reactively and begins living from inner authority. This is not isolation for comfort. It's isolation for integration. And here's what Jung emphasized that most people misunderstand. The hermit phase is not permanent, but it is irreversible. You don't return to who you were before. When the awakened return, if they return, they do so differently. Not to be absorbed back into unconscious systems, but to stand at the edges as living alternatives. They no longer argue with the collective. They no longer try to convince the sleeping. They no longer waste energy translating depth into surface language for audiences that can't receive it. They simply become, and that presence alone becomes disruptive in the best way. Jung saw that fully individuated people naturally attract those who are ready, not crowds, individuals, seekers, those on the brink of their own withdrawal. The awakened don't need platforms. They become quiet reference points, living proof that another way of being is possible. This is why so many awakened people end up living simpler lives. Fewer possessions, smaller circles, less visibility. Not because they failed, but because complexity and noise are no longer necessary. Their inner life has become rich enough that external stimulation feels like interference. One of Jung's patients described it simply. He said, "I used to need society to feel real. Now I need distance from it to stay real." That sentence captures everything. The collective often interprets withdrawal as weakness, as giving up, as opting out. But Jung understood it as strength, as discernment, as the psyche protecting its highest development. Once you've individuated, you can't pretend unconsciousness. Once you've integrated your shadow, you can't project it comfortably. Once you've lived from the self, you can't go back to living from approval. So the awakened stop forcing themselves into spaces that require self-betrayal. They stop attending conversations that demand dishonesty. They stop investing energy where depth is unwelcome. This isn't rejection, it's alignment. And slowly, quietly, a parallel world begins to form. Not a utopia, not a movement, not an ideology. A network of conscious pockets, small communities, one-on-one connections, creative works born from depth rather than trend, healing spaces that don't advertise, teachers who don't seek followers, guides who don't need recognition. Jung believed this was how real cultural transformation happens. Not through mass awakening all at once, but through individuals fully individuating first. Becoming stable, becoming whole, becoming unprojectable. Only then can consciousness spread without becoming another unconscious system. So if you feel the pull to withdraw, Jung would want you to understand this clearly. You are not broken. You are not antisocial. You are not escaping life. Your psyche has reached a point where participating in collective unconsciousness would require you to betray yourself. And the psyche will always choose wholeness over belonging when forced to decide. Let yourself disappear consciously, not forever, but intentionally. Stop expending your energy on unconscious interactions. Stop performing for audiences that cannot see you. Stop translating your depth into surface language just to be accepted. Find your ball engine. Whether it's physical solitude, psychological distance, or a radical simplification of your life, give your consciousness the conditions it needs to stabilize. Your disappearance is not selfish, it is necessary. The collective doesn't need more partially conscious participants. It needs fully individuated individuals who can hold depth without collapsing. It needs people who have gone far enough inward that they are no longer driven by fear, projection, or approval. And if you return, you will return with gifts that could only be formed in solitude. Truths that couldn't be spoken while you were still performing belonging. Presence that doesn't need validation. The spiritually awake are disappearing because awakening demands it. Not permanently, but necessarily. Not from hatred of people, but from love of truth, love of consciousness, love of authenticity. The kind of love that says, I must become whole, even if that means walking alone for a while. Jung would say this is not abandonment, it is evolution in motion. Withdraw, integrate, transform. And remember, your disappearance is not the end of your contribution. It is the beginning of it. If you're feeling this pull, you're not alone. You're walking an ancient path, and somewhere others are quietly walking it too, building the terrain you'll one day stand on together.